Welcome back to the Fleur Siobhan Podcast. In today's episode, I speak with professor, scientist, and primate expert Dr. Lisa Riley because apparently there's 5,000 people in the UK with a primate instead of a pet. So when I first heard this, I didn't believe it because I thought, who would want Curious George instead of a dog? But apparently there's 5,000 people out there that do. So currently it's completely legal to just have a pet monkey, have a pet primate. They're having finger monkeys, capuchins to marmosets, and it's completely not a problem. You could have one, you put it in a birdie cage, you put it in your living room. However, from the 6th of April, new laws will come into place. It makes it harder for people to buy a pet primate. So, in today's episode, I speak with Dr. Lisa Riley about, is it ethical to have a pet primate? How are people buying them? And the harsh realities of the underground primate pet trade in the UK, and what these laws will look like for the primates going forward. Thanks for watching, and make sure that you are subscribed.
Hi, it's nice to meet you. How are you doing today?
I'm okay, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. Thanks very much.
Okay.
Good.
So I'm sure you're aware, but currently UK it's not illegal to keep primates as pets. However, from the 6th of April, primate owners will have to obtain a license to be able to keep their pets, as well as following strict zoo level conditions and making sure that primates are fed the correct diet and with suitable companions. From your professional opinion, how important is this change? And would you say there's any risk that potentially could be overlooked by this happening?
The importance level is vital, and it's a step in the right direction for sure, but not enough of a step in my professional opinion. So when we see primates living in a pet situation currently, they're typically kept inside the house, usually in a parrot cage, on their own. And that brings with it considerable physical and mental suffering. What the idea behind the legislative change is the individual pet being kept like that will no longer be allowed. But as with any piece of legislation, the law is only ever as effective as it can be enforced. And we're talking about private ownership of animals. The RSPCA has suggested the number of primates being kept as pets is between really 5 and 8,000, and those estimates were calculated a few years ago now. The scale, therefore, of pet keeping, loads of people have already got primates as pets in their homes. Firstly, we're reliant on those individuals being either known to the local authority already, which if they're keeping a marmoset or if they're keeping a squirrel monkey, they're exempt from any other legislation. So things like Dangerous Wild Animals Act licensing. So the local authority wouldn't know that those people already owned primates. We are reliant on those owners finding out the information themselves, but also meeting the regulations themselves. So all of those conditions of the licensing scheme, those people have to meet them themselves and introduce themselves to the local authority. Now, a lot of people who currently owned a single primate either need to relinquish that primate so that that primate can move on into a social group, or they need to get another primate. So how well connected are people that own primates? And I don't think there isn't an association, there isn't a network for them. They would have to go and investigate independently again and try to find another primate that is either for sale or needs to be rehomed. So the enforcement is the issue. It's a good step forward, and for people who are knowledgeable, have found their way to the legislation, are known to the local authority already. Perhaps they were breeders of primates and other exotic pets. Perhaps they had kept an animal that qualified under the DWA. Perhaps they'd already been in contact because they were a more responsible pet owner with their local authority just to check. Well, yeah, those people we would capture, but the very vast majority, I don't know that this legislation will capture. And who's going to enforce it? If a neighbour or a visitor to your house sees that you have a primate that looks a bit poorly, is kept in a small cage and then reports you to the RSPCA, then yes, there is the opportunity to investigate, but that needs a third party, the RSPCA, to lead the investigation. So is it important? Yeah, it is important. It raises awareness and it means that there's a legal comparison point. So before we had the Animal Welfare Act, of course, but having the legal requirements laid out so clearly, there will be better arguments to be created if a case goes to the courts, a case of neglect or abuse. But local authorities are under a lot of financial pressure. A lot of local authorities will merge and become sort of super authorities. Who's going to pay for this? Who's going to support it so that it can be effectively delivered? I think they're key questions that need to be answered, and really time will tell. This type of legislative change, it's always done with optimism, and for responsible pet owners who genuinely love and care for their primates, they will reach out. They will be searching and seeking information actively anyway online, most likely, or at least from their local vet. But other people, the very vast majority of primates I've seen that are in a pet situation, a lot of their owners were not very well informed about their care or about the legislation. I don't know how that gap's going to be filled just by having another piece of legislation.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, how likely is it that these pets will be met to the welfare standards? Like the average pet owner, are they able to meet the welfare standards?
Um, that is a key question, but this is where the rights of the human as a pet owner versus the animal welfare consideration, I would say moral rights of the animal too, but a lot of people wouldn't go that far. Um, if you own a pet, because I think it's wrong that we own an animal, but in the eyes of the law, we own the pet. If you own a pet, that is a privilege, not a right, and you are in a position of privilege and you have a duty of care. If you cannot meet those needs, you shouldn't be the pet owner. And it's as clear cut for me as that. So this is a change where established pet owners are now being asked to, in some respects, greatly change the provisions that are given to the animals in their care. It will be expensive. It will be difficult to achieve well. It's difficult, for example, to find a wildlife specialist veterinarian. General practice veterinary practitioners, as educated and qualified as they are, do not know that much about primates because they never see them in practice. And all of those things cost a lot of money. Now, to protect the rights of the animals, yes, it's right that it costs a lot of money. It's right that it's a challenge and it's difficult. But for the owners who already have animals that they want to retain, but now provide a better standard of care for, it will be a very costly exercise.
And even just their diets, they have to, for this license, they have to be feeding them the correct diet. What kind of diet does a primate even eat, even have?
All sorts, and really it depends a lot on the species. So um, most primates are frugivores, so they would have a propensity to eat fruit. What they typically eat is a lot of fruit, a lot of starchy vegetables, a lot of leafy green vegetables, and then a lot of supplements, certainly in the zoo industry. So certainly for small primates, small South American primates like marmosets, tamarin, squirrel monkeys that are often kept, they need a vitamin D3 supplement. And some access to a UV light, preferably. Otherwise, they get metabolic bone disease. Um, Meeting the dietary requirements for an animal is very challenging, even for a zoo. It really depends exactly the ratio of what fruits, what vegetables, what pellet type. If you're going to feed pellet, the pellets are a bit boring for primates. um, the seeds, the nuts, the berries, insects as a protein supplement. That's really quite important for tamarins and for squirrel monkeys. Exudates, which are really important. So, like tree saps and gums, they're very important for marmosets. It's what they've been evolved to eat in the wild. Um, and getting hold of them is a challenge anyway. Getting hold of good quality examples of those is difficult. And it can be a real challenge for zoos to be able to manage the diet of a primate effectively, because it depends on how many individuals, at what stage of life and development, any underlying health condition, if the primate is on contraception or not, if they've got any underlying sort of propensity like diabetes, the amount of exercise they would have to do. But the diet itself is one point, but the presentation of the diet is really important for primates. So, primates need to be stimulated. What they should be doing for most of their time is either going out to find food or preparing and eating food, and then being social, and moving around trying to forage and find even more food or a place to roost for the night. And that's not what we see happening in captivity across the board, any form of captivity. So we've got to be really smart about the way we present food to primates that is naturalistic, that is going to cognitively challenge them, but also physically take up time. So that food shouldn't just be presented in a bowl. It should be hidden away and in lots of different devices, and simple things. You can put food in a clean sock and tie it up and hang them all around an enclosure. You can use an old paper bag, and put some straw or hay in it and then scatter some seeds or berries in it. All of those sorts of things. They take a lot of time, but primates need those, and they need variations of those every single day, just to stay well, just to stay motivated, just to stay focused on natural behaviours and being able to spend a lot of time engaging with food. But diets are always tricky in zoo situations and in private ownership, particularly. Um, one of the limitations of setup like this, because obviously the legislation aims to give the same sort of standard of care as a zoo-like standard of care, but zoos have huge connected networks. They share good practice. They have guidelines. They have breeding programs, and they have specialist guidelines. There are typically species guidelines. There is good practice that is shared at conferences, just between keeper networks, and a private owner is not going to get any of that. So it can be a real challenge to meet the dietary needs. It's a fundamental requirement for welfare, getting the right diet, the right nutrition, and presenting it in the right way. But it can be extraordinarily challenging.
It sounds really complex and also potentially expensive, which you could imagine would be hard for, an average pet owner, let alone a zoo. When you was a senior scientist for the RSPCA and working on the pet primate rehoming program, what kind of conditions did you see?
Dreadful. Um, we had a couple of active cases that really prompted the work on that project. It had been sort of simmering away because the RSPCA had seen more and more cases of an individual primate, so it was definitely on our radar. But at the time that I joined it, because I had primatology as a specialism, then I guess word gets around. So a lot more cases that perhaps the inspectorate were known about or had on their radar then came on our radar centrally, in the science groups of the ISPCA. So we saw just really sadly, typical cases. We started off with Mikey the marmoset. You might have found the news stories on Mikey the marmoset. So an older lady wanted to get a pet monkey, and she bought Mikey from someone who met in a car park and sold the marmoset to her from the boot of his car. And she just took the monkey home, and there was no duty of care evidenced whatsoever from the seller. And she took Mikey the monkey into a local pet shop and said, "I don't think this monkey's very well. There seems to be something wrong with him." And it was the pet shop owner that instantly realised, yes, there's a lot wrong with him. Long story short, Mikey was only an infant marmoset. He should have been with his mum and his dad, because marmosets pair bond, and both are very active, the father and the mother, very active in infant care. And Mikey should have been being cared for by both his parents. He had such bad bone deformity through getting such an inappropriate diet and no access to any light that he had to be in the end euthanized. Yeah, really, really just very
That's really
sad.
sad.
Such a struggle. And he was only so young. And we had several other rehoming cases through the inspectorate, who thankfully, once the owners had been told, actually, you have an issue here, then they relinquished their primates and we were able to rehome them. We had a couple of cases that went to court. A chap who had already been in court for neglect of a previous marmoset. He had an existing marmoset that was older, but then got an infant marmoset, dreadful enclosure, literally a piece of tubing above the window sill, and that was all that the primates had. The adult primate, because of the way their arms and legs are orientated, could grip onto this tube. The little infant couldn't, kept sliding off and just falling to the ground. And they were presented at a local vet's, who noted issues but didn't really escalate this as an issue. And that chap was successfully prosecuted and had to relinquish both. He was disqualified, so he had to get both primates, the existing and the infant, to be rehomed. A chap that was keeping a squirrel monkey, Charlie, in the back office of his car wash business near Heathrow on the M25. And Charlie was all alone. He was stuck in a little cage, a parrot cage. A parrot cage isn't good for a parrot, let alone for a primate. He had a busted old light, so it didn't work, and all of the electrical wires were inside the cage. He had a shelf that was just a plank of wood put across the layers of the mesh, which could have trapped him and crushed him. His diet was dreadful. He was in terrible body condition. He was underweight. He had a lack of muscle. He was, I describe them as chewy. So South American primates, they like to keep themselves clean and they groom an awful lot. And when they don't clean, they get all of these oils that build up on their coat and they look all chewy and matted. And that's exactly what he looked like. And he was sad. He just looked really lonely. And he had nothing to do day in, day out. He could sit at one area of a cage or hang off of the wire of the cage. And he was successfully prosecuted, and Charlie was then rehomed with Monkey World. And the pictures of him afterwards, he looks, I still use him as a case study for my students today, because his tenacity to recover and his body composition. He was a really young, entire male squirrel monkey, and he should have had a glowing coat and lots of muscles over his little body, and he should have been really attracted to all the females and attractive to the females. And in his state at rescue, he was dull and thin and tiny and a bit manky looking. And then when you see pictures of him later, he's all buffed up and glowing coat and bright-eyed and just, yeah, living a good life.
It sounds really sad. It's heartbreaking to hear about all this, but it's great to hear about the ones you did manage to rehome. Um, like you said earlier, there is an estimate of 5,000 and more pet primates in the UK. I can't imagine everybody who has a pet primate are able to meet these conditions. What do you think will happen to these primates?
They'll stay as they are unless they're discovered, which means then the local authority has to enact the power of the Animal Welfare Act to then take the primate away and initiate a case. So, there have been questions raised in the past about the Animal Welfare Act because prosecutions under that act often occur through the RSPCA. They're the only organisation that are equipped and that are ready to prosecute. The local authority hardly ever prosecutes, any local authority hardly ever prosecutes under the Animal Welfare Act. And they'll often try to prosecute under Trade Description Act if it's a buying or selling issue, and a danger to Human Health Act or risk in that type of legislative framework. But they now have a duty if they are known and the conditions are not being met. A knowledgeable person, either a vet or some other expert, needs to be consulted about the standards of care that those primates are enduring. And the licence needs to be issued with an acknowledgement that the correct standards of care have been met. Now, there's obviously going to be, in the interest of fairness, the opportunity for people to respond and make improvements. But that's, again, if they're known to the local authority or if they somehow become discovered by another organisation and then are known to the local authority. But the rest, they're going to stay as they are. And if people get twitchy, if they're keeping a primate in a parrot cage in their home, as they have done for maybe 15 years prior, and then start to think, oh goodness, I might be in real trouble here if the local authorities find out, then we risk those people either on the black market selling their primate, or maybe releasing them or relinquishing them, one hopes, as the sensible option to an organisation that can rehome the primate properly. But you do risk that. Any legislative change brings with it a risk that, this activity is going to go underground. And one of the reasons why an outright ban on keeping primates privately, so by a private individual rather than a conservation or education organisation, one of the reasons why there wasn't a ban is the worry that so many people would then relinquish their primates all at once and there's nowhere to put them. We couldn't house 5,000 primates in this country in our zoo systems or our sanctuaries now. We just couldn't. But knowing the zoo and sanctuaries as I do, they'd have a really good try at rehoming as many as they possibly could. But that's just unfeasible, that number of individuals.
That's what I was going to mention next, because I know there's a sanctuary in Cornwall that are really struggling financially, and they've had to stop being open to the public because they've just really struggled this year. Obviously, Monkey World is great, but I'm sure that sanctuary in Cornwall isn't the only one that is struggling. Yeah, I was thinking I couldn't imagine sanctuaries being able to have the space for all these primates to come in.
No country I know of.
Yeah.
My dogs are joining me. No country I know of would have the capacity. It's just not feasible. It's 5,000 individuals.
What a beautiful dog. You have such a beautiful dog.
Honey, thank you, love. There you go. Can you sit down? Thank you.
And
sorry about that.
I'm sure I know the answer, but some people think that it's not ethical to have primates as pets. What is your opinion on this?
I would like to see the UK moving towards a positive list, a very restricted positive list of what we could keep. And most, if not all, of those animals I would anticipate being domesticated species. In principle, I don't think I don't own my dogs. They're members of my family. And I would give them as much moral consideration as I would to any other member of my family. But in the eyes of the law, we still own animals. There's a whole big wider concern around that, and many people are concerned about what that would mean in terms of eating, consuming animals in the ways that we do. But something as specialised as a primate, primates can suffer just like you and I. They're self-aware. They have a theory of mind. They understand that they exist and that you exist as a separate individual. They share complicated relationships with each other, often very complicated social organisations. Some of them use tools. They show immense amounts of cognitive function, and they live a long time. So the suffering that you can endure as a primate is really profound. And I just think it devalues the natural to stick an individual into your house and use it as you would like. It just devalues the nature of that individual and nature as a whole. So ideally, I don't want to see any primate being held in captivity. But sadly, at least in the zoo situation, there is a conservation benefit. That argument can't be made in the private ownership market because, to my knowledge, private owners or pet owners of primates aren't having international conferences, aren't on international breeding programs, aren't sharing internationally that good practice. So for me, I'd prefer to see no primate ownership whatsoever. But I acknowledge this is an opportunity. It's a good step forward, but it doesn't quite go far enough.
And is that what you'd like to see going forward?
Total ban.
Mm-hmm.
Not just of primates, of any exotics. And that move towards a positive list would be really helpful. A lot of people, they love their pets, they love their primates, but there is a difference between loving an animal and meeting its needs. And often when we have all of that emotional attachment to the animal, it's even harder for us to achieve objectivity and say, are we actually providing this animal with what they need? And that is a real challenge. And for people, there's a lot of people making a lot of money through breeding primates. If you have a breeding pair of marmosets and they give birth twice a year to twins, you've got 4 babies to sell, and you could make £1,500 off of each one. That's quite a lot of money. That's a notable income. Now, the argument would be that the care and upkeep of those individuals is even more expensive than that, and it likely will be even more expensive than that. But so it should be, because they deserve a really high standard of care. And again, it isn't a right of ours to own these animals, it's a privilege. So what I would like is more guidance for people, but also we need to change our framework of how we interact with animals anyway. And if we're educated when we're younger about respect for nature, all aspects of nature, then we can embed respect for ourselves as well. And hopefully in the future, that would mean that a lot of people are instantly more aware, and we don't have the demand. We also would have a lot more support for owners as well. This really can be seen as a step to try and support owners to do the best for their primates and balance the wants and desires of the owner to own the primate, but also the needs of the primate. And it's quite an educational document when you look at all of the guidance and the annex for marmoset keeping. It's an educational document. Probably for a lot of people quite alarming because of the challenges of getting there and meeting those conditions, but it's raising awareness. And it also does provide that benchmark. So overall, it's good, but I'd like a positive list that says you can keep X, Y, and Z species that are usually domesticated species. Anything else, you can't keep them. So let's introduce some grandfather clauses where everyone who has those animals can still have them, but meet a high regulated set of conditions. And over time, let's phase out the keeping of exotics in a pet private ownership sphere. If we have to keep it to a zoo situation in the future, then so be it. But private ownership, private to me is in isolation. And the one thing that you need to be really successful is an exchange of information and an exchange of expertise. And that's what the zoo industry offers. Don't get me wrong, there are massive challenges with the zoo industry as well. But at least there are those open communication networks.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I don't want to take too much of your time, but Dr. Lisa O'Reilly, thank you. You have been amazing. I've really enjoyed listening to you, and I'm a big animal lover, and everything you were saying, I agreed with. This conversation has been like extremely interesting. And every time I'm at a zoo or I'm watching Monkey World or something like that, I always think, oh, I wish I was working with animals, like to help them, something like to help them. So listening to you, I'm thinking, oh, I wish I was in her lectures. Thank you so much, and thank you for today.
So,
Thank you.
it's very nice to meet you, Flo. You take care and
And
best
you.
of luck.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.